What are De Morgan's laws? Let's consider. Hello, I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Channel Introduction to Propositional Logic course. Today we're going to talk about De Morgan's laws, although in the textbook that we're using, this section is just called negation. Kind of strange. I'm not totally sure why that is. But consider the statement, Ilsa is neither funny nor interesting. So that word neither means something like not either. So it's something like this. It's not the case that Ilsa is either funny or Ilsa is interesting. So symbolizing that, it would be not F for Ilsa is funny or I for Ilsa is interesting. Now, what does that mean to say not F or I? Well, F or I means that at least one of those two things are true. F is true or I is true. One of those two things are true. Possibly both of them are true. Now, to say that it's not the case that that's true, then is to say that it's not the case that at least one of them is true. In other words, that's to say that both of them are false. So this would be the same thing as saying it's not the case that Ilsa is funny, so not F, and it's not the case that Ilsa is interesting, not I. So not F and not I. And in fact, these two propositions are logically equivalent, as I'll show you right now. Okay, that first disjunction, only false when both disjuncts are false, otherwise true. So it's false in row 4, true in all the other rows. And the negation sign, that not sign, is going to flip all those T's to F's and the F's to T's. In the second proposition, we have to do the nots first, and the nots will switch all the T's to F's and F's to T's. And then the conjunction is only true when both conjuncts are true, and that only happens in row 4. On all the other rows, it's false. So you can see here, both propositions have that FFFT format. So they're logically equivalent. This is what's known as De Morgan's law. The fact that these two propositions are logically equivalent is actually only half of De Morgan's law. The other half would be something like this. What if I were to say, it's either the case that Ilsa is not funny or she is not interesting? Now that sounds like the first thing that we said, but it's actually a little bit different. Now we're saying it's not F or not I. So we're not saying it's not F or I. We're saying not F or not I. How are the two statements different? Well, in this case, that or means that at least one of those two disjuncts are true. Possibly both of them are true. So it could be the case that Ilsa is not funny. It could be the case that Ilsa is not interesting, or it could be the case that both of those two things are true, right? She's not funny and she's not interesting. Whereas the last one said that, both of them had to be true, that Ilsa is not funny and she's not interesting. This one is saying, it could be either one of those. Looking at this a different way, we could say that the only thing we know for sure is that she's not both funny and interesting, right? We know that she's either not funny or she's not interesting or both, but we know for sure she's not one of those two things for sure. So we could say it's not the case, not, and then F and I. It's not the case that she's funny and interesting at the same time. Again, what does this mean? That means that it's not the case that both of those two things are true. It could be the case that F is false by itself and I is true. It could be the case that I is false by itself and F is true. Could be the case that both of them are false. And these two propositions are logically equivalent, just like the former two. So let's see how that works. In the first conjunction, the conjunction is only true when both conjuncts are true, only happens in row 1, otherwise it's false. And the negation will switch all the T's and F's and T's. Then in the second proposition, we have to deal with the negations first, and the negations flip the F's and T's and F's. And the disjunction is only false when both disjuncts are false. And that only happens in row 1. The rest of them are true. And we could see these two propositions are logically equivalent. They both have the form FTTT. And that's really all there is about De Morgan's laws. Now it's time to get into the exercises. However, I will warn you, if you're here specifically for De Morgan's laws, these exercises aren't going to be that helpful. They do have some instances of De Morgan's laws, but they have a lot that are not instances of De Morgan's laws. So you can stick around if you'd like to. If you're here doing the course, then definitely you want to stick around, but I just don't want to waste your time. So let's look at problem number 1. So problem number 1 says, Bob is happy if and only if it is raining. Let's symbolize this as H for Bob is happy and R for it is raining. So that would be H if and only if R. And then the next proposition is either it's raining or the sun is shining. So we'll make S the sun is shining. So R or S. And then, so Bob is happy only if the sun is not shining. Now, what's interesting here is that only if. The way we translate that is as an if-then statement where only if is where the then should be. So it'll be if H, then not S. Looking at this argument, I believe this is going to be invalid because saying H if and only if R means that if H is true, R has got to be true. And if R is true, H has got to be true. R or S means that, at least one of those two things are true. So if H is true, then not S is true. Well, H could be true and R would have to be true. And then that R or S, just because R is true doesn't mean S has to be false, right? R could be true and S could be true too, because that disjunction means at least one of these two things are true. So I think this is going to be invalid, and I'm guessing it's going to be on that top row. But let's fill out the T's and F's and see where we go. Actually, before we fill them out, in the instructions, it says we're allowed to cheat. So we're going to use some of our cheating techniques. I am going to start off by filling out just the T's and F's for premise 1. And now that biconditional is only true when both component propositions are true or both component propositions are false. Otherwise, it's false. So remember, it's the case that we're looking for lines where the premises are true and the conclusion is false. If we have at least one row like that where the premises are true and the conclusion is false, then this is an invalid argument. Otherwise, it's a valid argument. So I don't really care if there are any rows where the premises are false. So I can go ahead and cross those rows off and just not worry about them. And now I can worry about premise 2. That disjunction is only going to be false when both disjuncts are false. That's in the last row, row 8. Otherwise, it's true. So it looks like we don't have to worry about row 8. Now let's look at the conclusion. First, the negation on the S is going to flip the T's and F's. And next, that conditional is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. And that happens in row 1. The rest of them are truesies. So it looks like in row 1, I have true premises and a false conclusion. This is an invalid argument. Invalid. Boo. Problem 2 is absolutely atrocious. It's I can't get the whole thing onto the screen. Like, look, like it just won't stay there. So we're going to have to sort of shift between screens as we go. But here's what it says for number 2. If I have neither money nor a card. So remember, that's that neither A nor B. That's going to be not either A or B. So not A or B, right? So in this case, it's money nor card. So let's make it M or C. Not M or C, then I shall walk. So if not M or C, then W for walk. I shall walk. If I walk, if W, then I shall get tired or have a rest. So if W, then T or R, tired or rest. So if I have a rest, so if R, then I have money. So if R, then M. And these look very unrelated. So I think this is going to be invalid. Yeah, when you have W true, that's going to make the first one true. The first premise true. When you have R true, that's going to make the second premise true. And then when you have M false, R being true and M being false will make the conclusion false. So at least one row where W is true, R is true, and M is false, this is going to be invalid. So let's see what happens. I think the first thing we should do is to tackle that conclusion just because it looks easier. Okay, wow. So one good thing about this is that conditional is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. That means if the consequent is true, when M is true, then that is going to be a true conditional. Now, remember, we don't care if the conclusion is true. What we're worried about are the premises being true and the conclusion false. So in the entire first half of this, all the consequents are true. So I can actually get rid of the entire first half of this. So that's pretty sweet. And now I just have to make all the falses wherever we have the antecedent true and the consequent false. And that happens every other one, it looks like. Okay, now let's try proposition 1, the premise 1. The first thing we need to take care of is that disjunction, only false when both disjuncts are false, but true otherwise. Next, the negation will flip all the T's and F's. And finally, the conditional, only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. That looks like that happens in this row and this row. The rest are true. Okay, so we've narrowed things down a little bit more. Let's do that second proposition. Okay, first the disjunction, which is only false when both disjuncts are false, which never happens. And now the conditional is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, which also never happens. Well, I forgot to clean up the conclusion section, but the conclusion, the open rows, the ones I didn't cross out, all have true premises and false conclusions. So this is definitely an invalid argument. Number 3, Maisie is upset only if there is thunder. So again, that only if, we treat it as an if then, where only if is where the then should be. So if you, then T. If upset, then thunder. If there is thunder, then there is lightning. So if T, then L. Therefore, either Maisie is not upset, either not you, or there is lightning, or L. So not you or L. This one I think is going to be a valid argument because there's a hypothetical syllogism. There's such a thing as a hypothetical syllogism. If you, then T. If T, then L. Therefore, if you, then L. That's a valid argument. And so if you, then L is the same thing as if either not you or L. So I think this is going to be valid. They're the same thing because a conditional is true when either the antecedent is false or the consequent is true. It's only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. Well, anyway, let's go ahead and divvy out these T's and F's. The first conditional, remember, only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. That happens in rows 3 and 4. Otherwise true. The second conditional, same thing, only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. Otherwise true. So remember, we can get rid of the rows where there are any false premises. That's this row, this, and this guy. Okay, in the conclusion, the not is gonna switch all the T's and F's. And now the disjunction, only false when both disjuncts are false, which never happens. So it's never the case that we have premises that are true and the conclusion is false. So this is a valid argument. Problem number 4, the car started only if you turn the key and press the accelerator. So that only if, remember, is an if then, but with the only if where the then should be. So let's say S for started, if S, then K and A. K turn the key and A press the accelerator. And then if you turn the key but did not press the accelerator. So if K and not A, then car did not start, not S. The car did not start, so not S. Therefore, either you press the accelerator but did not turn the key, so either A and not K, or you neither turn the key nor press the accelerator, so neither is not either, remember. So not K or A. The easiest one to do for this is the not S part. That'll knock out about half of these things. The negation will switch all the T's and F's. And we can get rid of all the rows where there are F's, and that's the top 4. Now let's take care of premise 1. The conjunction there is only going to be false, or only going to be true when both conjuncts are true, which is row 5 there. The rest of them are going to be false. And then that conditional is only false when you have a true antecedent and a false consequent, which never happens. So that didn't help us at all. That didn't get rid of anything. Let's go ahead and try premise 2. Okay, now let's get rid of those negations, the not A and the not S. And again, flipping the T's and F's. The conjunction, only true when both conjuncts are true. That happens in the row, looks like row 6. Otherwise, it's false. And finally, that conditional, only false when only false when you have a true antecedent and false consequence, That never happens. So once again, we don't get rid of anything. All right. First, we have the negation for the K. And next, we can do the conjunction there, which is only true when both conjuncts are true, which never happens. Now, the or, the disjunction, only false when both disjuncts are false. That's the last row. Otherwise true. The negation will flip all those T's and F's. And finally, we have the big disjunction, which, again, only false when both disjuncts are false. That happens actually row 5, 6, 7. So we have 3 rows that make this thing invalid. All right, problem number 5. Either Maisie isn't barking or there is a robber outside. So not B or R. If there is a robber outside and Maisie is not barking, so if R and not B, then she is asleep or depressed, then A or D, asleep or depressed. Maisie is neither asleep nor depressed. So it's, remember, neither is that, not either. So it's not the case that A or D. Therefore, Maisie is barking. B, if and only if there is a robber outside. R. B, if and only if R. Oh, these are getting long. Let's go ahead. Let's start with the conclusion. Okay, the biconditional is only true when both component propositions are true or both component propositions are false. Now we can cross off all the conclusions that are true. All right, now let's do that first premise. Now the negation of B is going to flip all the T's and F's. And the disjunction is only false when both disjuncts are false. That actually happens in 4 rows. So we actually get to cross off 4 more rows. And now let's do the last premise, hoping that that will cross off all the rest of them. I don't think it will, but let's see. Okay, the disjunction is only false when both disjuncts are false. And the negation is going to switch all the T's and F's. And we were so close, we get to knock off 3 rows. Now only we have to deal with 1, which is nice, still nice. Okay, so first the not with a B. Now let's do the conjunction is true because both conjuncts are true. And the disjunction is false because both disjuncts are false. And the conditional is only true. It's only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. Cha-ching! This is a valid argument. Dude, that's a lot. I think what I'm going to do is I am going to be done for the night, and I will come back and do the next 5 tomorrow night. It'll only be a moment for you on the video, though, so I might look a little different a moment from now, but I will see you. Okay, let's get back into it. So on number 6, 6 is, if it isn't sunny, then either it's too windy or we are sailing. So if not S... Oh, no. Let's make it if not you. And that's because there's sunny and sailing. So I can't make 2 S's, right? So I'll make U as the second letter in sunny and A is the second letter in sailing. That's the way I like to do it. So if not you, then either W or A. We are having fun if we are sailing. So that's an if-then statement that's been flipped around. So then put that if in the front. If we are sailing, then we are having fun. So if A, then F. It's not sunny and it's not windy, too windy either. So not U and not W. Hence, we're having fun. That word hence is like a therefore. Therefore, we're having fun. Therefore, F. So let's go ahead and try this one. I think the conclusion looks like the best place to start. Again, we're not worried about the places where the conclusion is true. We're only worried about where the conclusion is false, so we can cross off half of these. Okay, let's go ahead and try and do the second premise. If A, then F. The conditional is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, which happens actually a number of times. So again, we can cross out all rows where we have the premises false. Now let's try that third premise. Now, those negation signs are going to flip the T's and F's. And the conjunction is only true when we have both conjuncts true. That only happens in the last row. The rest of them are false. So we can cross out all the rows with F's on them. And we have only one row left. The not will change the U to true, and the disjunction will be false because both disjuncts are false. And the conditional false when you have an antecedent true and a consequent false, which is actually the case here. So we can cross out this row and we can say that this is a valid argument. And it looks like it makes the most, here's what makes the most sense of it. The third premise says that both not U and not W is true. So we know that not U is true for sure, right? And then it says that the first premise says that not, if not U is true, which we know, then either W or A is true. So we know that W or A is true. And then back to that third premise, it says that not W is also true. So if either W or A is true, and we know that not W, that must mean that A is true. And then we have that second premise, if A is true, then F is true, right? So we know that A is true here. That means that F is going to be true. And that's our conclusion, F. So makes sense. Okay, problem number 7. Either you came through Singleton and Maitland or you came through Newcastle. So either S or M or N. You didn't come through Singleton or Maitland. You came through Cessnock. So you could have made this either one or two propositions. I happen to make it two propositions. So you could have said it's not either S or M and C, or you could have said not either S or M and then have another proposition saying C. That's what I chose to do. Either one is going to be totally fine. It's going to mean the same thing. Therefore, you came through both Newcastle and Cessnock. So N and C. I think this one is going to be valid, and here's why. So the conclusion says both N and C are both true. And we have one premise that says C is true, so we're already halfway there, right? We've already got half of it. Now we just need the premises to prove that N is also true. And let's see, S and M or N. Here's where our fun De Morgan's laws come into play. Not S or M, the second premise, means not S and not M. But notice that first premise says either S and M are true or N is true. Well, we know that both S is false and M is false. from that second premise because it's De Morgan's law. So we also know that S and M have got to be false. So that means that N has got to be true. So awesome. Let's go ahead and start with C. Again, we can cross out all rows where the premises are false. Okay, let's try the conclusion now. That conjunction will only be true when both conjuncts are true, otherwise false. And now we can cross off every line where the conclusion is true. Now let's work on premise 2. The disjunction will be false only when both disjuncts are false. And the negation will flip all the T's and F's. And we can cross off all the lines where the premises are false. Okay, now we only have one line left. Let's do that first premise. The conjunction will be false because both conjuncts are false. And the disjunction will also be false because both disjuncts are false. And we have a false premise, so we can cross that one off. So this argument is valid. Argument 8. We shall have lobster for lunch provided that the shop is open. So if the shop is open, then we shall have lobster for lunch. That's the way this one is set up. So let's make it if O, then L. Either the shop will be open or it's Sunday. So either O or S. If it's Sunday, we shall go to a restaurant and have lobster for lunch. So if S, then R and L. So we shall have lobster for lunch, therefore L. This also sounds like it's going to be a valid argument. Let's see. So either O is going to be true. It's because either O is true or false, right? If O is true, then we have L. If O is false, then S is true by premise 2. And then if S is true, then both R and L are going to be true by premise 3. And if both R and L are true, then L is true by itself. So if O is true, then L is true. And if O is false, then L is true. So either way, L is going to be true. Let's start off with the conclusion there. I will cross off those lines where the conclusion is true. Now let's do that first premise. And that conditional is false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, otherwise true. And we can cross off all lines where the premises are false. Now let's go for that second premise. The disjunction is false when both disjuncts are false, otherwise true. And we can cross off the ones where the premises are false. Now we only have one premise left to go. Okay, the conjunction is going to be false in both cases because you have to, in order for it to be true, both conjuncts have to be true. And now we have a conditional where the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. That means those conditionals are false. And that means we have premises that are false, which we can cross off. And our argument is valid. Argument 9. Catch Billy a fish and you will feed him for a day. So I have C for catch and D for day. So if C, then D. Teach him to fish, then you'll feed him for life. So if T, then L. So either you won't feed Billy for life, either not L, or you will teach him to fish, or T. So one thing to notice about this one is that the first premise has nothing to do with either the second premise or the conclusion. The first premise is just sort of thrown in there. So it's totally useless. Then another thing to notice is that you have if T then L, which is a conditional only false when the T part is true and the L part would be false. So looking at that, the conclusion, it says either T is true or L is false. That is not something that is possible to have both of those two things be true. But it's possible for both of those things to be false, right? It's possible for T to be false and L to be true. So if you didn't teach him to fish, he still could be fed for life. So this is going to be an invalid argument. But let's go ahead and let's start with the second premise, I guess. Okay, this probably wasn't the best choice, but that conditional is false when we have the antecedent true and the consequent false. That happens here, 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 and here. The rest are true. So we can cross off the ones with F's. And now this is going to be invalid, so I'm trying to avoid having to fill them both out, but I'm going to have to fill them both out. I may as well. I'll do the first premise. Conditional only false where you have antecedent true, consequent false. That's in the middle there. And we'll cross off all the ones with premises with falses. And now let's do the conclusion. The negation will flip the T's and F's. And the disjunction is false when both disjuncts are false. That's here, here, and here. I accidentally erased the bottom one. I don't remember what it was, but I can show you. I know that this is a line where it's invalid, and this is a line where we're invalid, and this is a line where we're invalid. So this is definitely an invalid argument. Last one. Number 10, I'll be happy if the Tigers win. Who's a Tigers fan? Angels. Go Angels all the way. I doubt the Tigers are probably some Australian team, so it's probably not baseball. I don't know. I'll be happy if the Tigers win. So if T, now notice that where that if is. So it's not an only if, right? This is an if. So this is actually an if then that's been switched around. So if the Tigers win, then I'll be happy. So if W, then H. If win, then happy. Moreover, if they will win, they will win or else they won't win. So W or not W. However, assuming they don't, it will be a draw. If not W, then D, draw. Therefore, if it's not a draw, if not D, and they don't win, and not W, then H. I could tell you right off the bat that premise 2 is a tautology, right? That's true no matter what. So I could just write T's down in the center. Hopefully that's not cheating too much. Hopefully you know what I'm doing. It says either W is true or it's not true, and in classical logic, those are your only two options. So this is a necessary truth. We have to have this thing to be true. So it's always true. Okay, that Conditional will be false if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. That happens here and here. We can cross off the premises with, the lines with false premises and start to work on proposition 3. The negation flips the T's and F's. And the conditional is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, which is here and here. Cross off those F lines. And then we can work on the conclusion. Negation sign will flip the T's and F's. Conjunction is only true when both conjuncts are true, which never happens. And the conditional is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, which never happens. So whenever the premises are true, the conclusion is also true. This is a valid argument. It's a little bit harder for me to explain why this is a valid argument, but here goes. So premise 3 says if not W, then D. So if not W is true, then D is going to be true. But the conclusion says in the case that not D and not W are both true, then H will be true, right? But think about that, not D and not W. Well, premise 3 says if not W is true, then D has to be true. So that means that not D can't be true. So it's impossible to have not D and not W. That's an impossible situation. So because that's an impossible situation, you're always going to have a false with that antecedent. And then it doesn't matter what you have for a consequent, because remember, a conditional is true when you have, is only false when you have a true antecedent and a false consequent. And if the antecedent is always false, then you don't have to worry about that. Now, in this case, the antecedent isn't actually always going to be false. It's that the places where it would have been false are taken out by the premise 3. So I believe, look in the last line. Let's look at that real quick. Looks like I can't get rid of it. So this is all falses. The nots flip the F's to T's. And the conjunction would be true. And because the conjunction is true, we have a TF situation. So we have a false conditional. And there we have a false conditional, and that's a place where we would have all true premises and a false conclusion. But it's this guy right here, this guy being false, that is going to make it impossible for this guy right here to ever be true. You know, this has to be true in order for the conclusion to be false, right? Which makes it an invalid argument. But if you have these F's all over the place blocking this guy, then that can never happen. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know. If you want me to explain it more, just let me know in the comments, and I'll definitely give it a go a second time. But that's all I have for this one. Go ahead and read the whole next section. I believe it's 6.6, like 0.1, 2, and then there might be some exercises for 0.3. So go ahead and try all that, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.